5 True Appalachia Horror Stories Story 1. The Bell Witch's Deadly Vengeance. The autumn wind whistled through the Tennessee woods as John Bell rode his horse back to the farm. It was 1817 and something was terribly wrong. He had just shot at the strangest creature he had ever seen in his cornfield. It had the body of a large dog, but its head was that of a rabbit. The thing had stared at him with eyes that seemed almost human, before it vanished into thin air after his bullet struck. John tried to push the incident from his mind as he approached his log cabin home. His wife Lucy was preparing dinner, and the children were finishing their evening chores. Everything seemed normal. But that night, as the Bell family settled into their beds, the peace was shattered. It started with a sound like chains being dragged across the wooden floors. John bolted upright, his heart pounding. The noise moved from room to room, scraping and clanking in the darkness. He lit a candle and searched the house, but found nothing. When he returned to bed, the sound started again, this time accompanied by what sounded like invisible dogs fighting and something gnawing at the bedpost right beside his head. This was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, the activity grew worse. John's daughter Betsy began waking up with bruises on her arms and face. She claimed that something was pinching her in the night, slapping her and pulling her hair. His other children reported seeing strange apparitions on the property. Drew had approached a bird of extraordinary size that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light before it vanished. Betsy saw a girl in a green dress swinging from an oak tree, only to disappear when she called out to her. John Bell was a proud man and a respected member of the Red Bottom Baptist Church community. He did not want word of these happenings to spread. He was terrified of what his neighbors might think. For months he kept the haunting a secret, trying to maintain normalcy while his family was tormented every single night. But he could not bear the burden alone. Finally, he confided in his trusted friend James Johnston. Johnston was skeptical and suggested John was simply stressed from farm work. But when John begged him to spend just one night at the Bell farm, Johnston reluctantly agreed. That night changed everything. Johnston arrived at sunset, and the family gathered for dinner. Everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful. As they ate, Johnston joked about spirits and told John he was worrying over nothing. But when they retired to the guest room, the performance began. At first, it was just scratching at the walls. Then the bed began to shake violently. Johnston felt invisible hands grab at his blankets, tearing them away no matter how tightly he held on. He heard breathing right next to his ear, hot and rancid. Then came the voice. It was a woman's voice, ancient and filled with hatred. It whispered terrible things, secrets that Johnston had never told anyone, sins from his past that made him weep with shame. The voice knew everything. It laughed at his fear, a sound like broken glass scraping against stone. By morning, Johnston was pale and shaking. He left the Bell farm before breakfast and never returned. But the damage was done. He told everyone in Robertson County what he had experienced, and soon hundreds of people were camping on Bell's property, hoping to witness the supernatural phenomenon for themselves. The entity seemed to feed on the attention. It grew stronger and more violent. It began to speak to the family directly, claiming to be the spirit of a local woman named Kate Batts, a neighbor who John Bell had supposedly wronged in a land dispute. The entity called itself the Bell Witch, and it declared that it had come to torment John Bell until his dying day. The Bell Witch was intelligent and cruel. It would recite 2 different sermons word for word while they were being preached at churches 13 miles apart. It sang hymns in perfect pitch and argued theology with the local preachers who came to investigate. It seemed to know everything about everyone, and it used that knowledge to humiliate and frighten all who encountered it. But its true hatred was reserved for John Bell and his daughter Betsy. John began to feel ill. His jaw would seize up, making it impossible for him to eat. He suffered from terrible pains in his chest and head. The doctors could find nothing wrong with him, but he grew weaker with each passing day. The Bell Witch took credit for his suffering, promising that she would not rest until John Bell was dead. Betsy suffered differently. She was engaged to a local man named Joshua Gardner, a kind and gentle soul who loved her deeply. But the Bell Witch terrorized her day and night, telling her that she must break off the engagement. When Betsy refused, the attacks intensified. She was beaten by invisible hands, her hair was pulled out in clumps, and she was tormented with visions of horrible things that would happen to Joshua if she married him. The famous General Andrew Jackson heard about the Bell Witch and decided to investigate. He arrived with a wagon full of armed men, confident that he would expose the fraud. But as soon as his wagon crossed onto Bell's property, the wheels locked up and would not move no matter how hard the horses pulled. Then the Bell Witch's voice rang out across the fields, mocking Jackson and his men. That night, the entity tormented them so severely that they fled before dawn. Jackson later said he would rather fight the British at New Orleans than face the Bell Witch again. On December 19, 1820, John Bell collapsed in his cornfield. He was carried to his bed, unconscious and barely breathing. The family stayed by his side through the night, but by morning he seemed to be improving. Lucy felt a glimmer of hope as she went to prepare him some breakfast. But when she returned to the bedroom, John was convulsing. White foam poured from his mouth and his eyes rolled back in his head. Lucy screamed for help and the family rushed to his side. On the nightstand next to the bed, they found a small vial filled with dark liquid. None of them had seen it before. Lucy picked up the vial with trembling hands. Before anyone could stop her, the Bell Witch's voice filled the room, triumphant and cruel. "I gave him that medicine last night while he slept. He will never wake again." To test the claim, they gave a drop of the liquid to the family cat. The animal immediately went into violent convulsions and died within seconds. John Bell died minutes later, his body racked with the same seizures. The Bell Witch sang hymns all through John's funeral, her voice echoing across the cemetery. To this day, Tennessee remains the only state in America to officially recognize a death as being caused by supernatural means. But the witch was not finished. She continued to torment Betsy until the young woman finally broke off her engagement to Joshua Gardner, her spirit completely broken. Only then did the attacks on Betsy stop. In 1821, the Bell Witch announced that she was leaving, but promised to return in 1935 to haunt John Bell's descendants. Dr. Charles Bailey Bell, the closest living relative, was a neurologist in Nashville when 1935 arrived. Whether the witch kept her promise, no one knows for certain. Dr. Bell never spoke publicly about what happened that year. Today, you can visit the Bell Witch Cave in Adams, Tennessee. People report strange phenomena there. Cameras malfunction. Voices are heard in empty passages. Some visitors feel invisible hands push them or pull at their clothes. And late at night, some say you can still hear her singing those old hymns, waiting patiently for another bell to torment. The case of the Bell Witch has never been explained or debunked. Whatever haunted the Bell family was real enough to drive a man to his grave and break the spirit of everyone who encountered it. The ancient mountains of Tennessee keep their secrets well, and some doors once opened can never be closed. Story 2. The Mothman Prophecies. On a cold November evening in 1966, two young couples drove along Route 62 near Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Roger and Linda Scarberry were in the front seat, with Steve and Mary Millette in the back. They were just out for a drive, looking for a quiet place to talk away from the noise of town. The old TNT plant from World War II loomed in the darkness ahead, its abandoned buildings casting strange shadows in the headlights. The plant had been built during the war to manufacture explosives, but it had been shut down for years. The massive complex of bunkers and storage igloos sat empty and decaying, surrounded by dense forest. Local teenagers sometimes came here to party or explore, despite warnings from police to stay away. The place had a bad reputation. People said they felt watched when they went there. Animals acted strange near the property. But on this night, The four friends just wanted somewhere quiet. As they drove past one of the large concrete igloos, Linda screamed. Something was standing near the building. At first, Roger thought it was a man, but as his headlights swept across it, he realized this was nothing human. The creature stood, at least 7 feet tall, with a massive build that seemed almost too large for its frame. But what made Roger's blood run cold were the eyes. Two enormous red eyes, glowing like burning coals, stared directly at them from a face that seemed to have no other features. The eyes were hypnotic and terrible, filled with an intelligence that made Roger feel like prey being studied by a predator. And then the creature moved. It did not walk. It did not run. Its massive wings, each at least 10 feet long, unfolded from its sides, and it launched itself into the air with impossible speed. The wingspan was enormous, blocking out the sky above them. Roger slammed his foot on the accelerator, the tires screaming as the car shot forward down the dark road. "It's following us," Steve shouted from the back seat, his face pressed against the rear window. The creature was keeping pace with them, flying parallel to the car with slow, powerful beats of its wings. The red eyes never blinked, never looked away. They could see it clearly in the darkness, its form silhouetted against the night sky. Roger pushed the speedometer past 70, then 80, then 90 miles per hour. The old road was not meant for such speed, and the car shook violently as it tore around curves. But still the creature kept pace, effortlessly matching their speed. When they hit 100 miles per hour, Mary was sobbing in the back seat, convinced they were all going to die. Only when they crossed the city limits of Point Pleasant did the creature finally veer away, disappearing into the darkness over the Ohio River. Roger did not slow down until they reached the police station, where they stumbled inside, pale and shaking. The local police were skeptical at first, but the four witnesses were clearly traumatized. Their fear was real. Officer Millard Halstead agreed to drive back to the TNT plant with them, but they found nothing except disturbed dust and some strange impressions in the ground that might have been tracks. Whatever they had seen was gone. The next morning, the story hit the local newspaper. A reporter coined the term Mothman to describe the creature, inspired by the Batman television show that was popular at the time. The name stuck, and suddenly Point Pleasant was thrust into the national spotlight. Over the next 13 months, the Mothman was seen at least 8 more times by various witnesses around Point Pleasant. Each description was remarkably consistent. A massive, man-shaped figure with wings and glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce into your very soul. Some witnesses reported that the creature made no sound when it flew, which somehow made it even more terrifying. A few claimed they heard a high-pitched screech like metal scraping on metal. But the Mothman sightings were just the beginning of a year of strange phenomena in Point Pleasant. UFO sightings increased dramatically throughout 1967. Residents reported seeing strange lights in the sky almost nightly. Some described cigar-shaped objects hovering over the TNT plant. Others saw balls of light that would chase their cars or hover outside their windows. Then the men in black appeared. Well-dressed men in dark suits began showing up around town, asking questions about the Mothman and the UFO sightings. They claimed to be government officials, but they were strange. They spoke in monotone voices and asked bizarre questions. Their skin looked wrong, almost gray under certain lights. They seemed to know things about people they should not have known. When townspeople tried to verify their credentials, the organizations they claimed to work for had never heard of them. The paranormal investigator John Keel arrived in Point Pleasant to study the phenomena. He interviewed dozens of witnesses and experienced strange events himself. He received cryptic phone calls from voices that predicted future events. Some of those predictions came true. He felt constantly watched. The atmosphere in Point Pleasant had become oppressive, as if something terrible was building toward an inevitable conclusion. On December 15, 1967, That conclusion arrived. The Silver Bridge connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to Gallipolis, Ohio, across the Ohio River. It was rush hour, and the bridge was packed with cars filled with people heading home from work or doing their Christmas shopping. The bridge had been built in 1928 and carried thousands of vehicles every day. At precisely 5:04 p.m., an eye-bar in the bridge's suspension chain suddenly failed. The bridge did not collapse gradually. It went down in seconds. Drivers felt the roadway suddenly drop beneath them. Metal screamed as the entire structure twisted and fell. Cars plunged into the freezing river below, sinking quickly in the deep water. People trapped in their vehicles screamed for help as the current pulled them downstream. Others clung to debris in the icy water, their fingers going numb as they fought to stay afloat. 46 people died that day. Some were never found, their bodies swept away by the river. Others were pulled from the wreckage hours later. The town was devastated. Almost everyone in Point Pleasant knew someone who had died on the bridge. And in the chaos and horror of that day, several witnesses would later claim they saw the Mothman. It was spotted on the bridge just before the collapse, its red eyes glowing in the winter twilight. Others said they saw it perched on top of the superstructure, its wings spread wide as if in triumph. A few claimed it flew alongside their cars as they crossed the bridge, following them until the moment the structure gave way. After December 15, 1967, the Mothman sightings stopped. The UFO reports decreased. The men in black disappeared. Whatever had been happening in Point Pleasant simply ended, as if the purpose had been fulfilled. Some people believed the Mothman had caused the bridge collapse. Others thought it had been trying to warn them, appearing again and again to draw attention to the danger. Investigators determined that the bridge failure was due to a tiny flaw in one of the eye bars, a defect that had existed since the bridge was built. The stress of decades of use had finally caused it to fail catastrophically. But the people who saw the Mothman before the collapse do not believe in coincidence. They remember those burning red eyes and the feeling of dread that came with them. They remember the year of strangeness that preceded the disaster. And they wonder if the Mothman was a harbinger of doom, a supernatural herald of tragedy that manifests when death is about to visit a place. The Mothman has been reported in other locations since 1967, always in the months or weeks before major disasters. Sightings were reported before the 9/11 attacks, before the Chernobyl disaster, and before various bridge collapses and mining accidents. Each time, witnesses described the same creature with the same red eyes, watching silently from the darkness. Point Pleasant has embraced its strange history. A Mothman museum stands in the town, along with a 12-foot-tall statue of the creature. Every year, the Mothman Festival brings thousands of visitors who want to learn about the legend. But for the people who were there in 1966 and 1967, who saw the creature and lived through the horror of the Silver Bridge collapse, the Mothman is no tourist attraction. It is a reminder that the ancient Appalachian Mountains hold things that we do not understand, things that watch us with red, unblinking eyes, things that appear when death is near, as inevitable and unstoppable as the collapse of old bridges and the falling of darkness. Late at night, people in Point Pleasant still sometimes see strange lights over the old TNT plant, and occasionally, someone will report glimpses of a massive winged figure silhouetted against the moon. The eyes are always the same, burning red like coals from hell, watching and waiting. The Mothman is patient. Disasters come in cycles, and when the time is right, it will return. Story 3. The Wampus Cat's Eternal Hunt. The Cherokee hunting party had been preparing for 3 days. The men gathered in a sacred circle deep in the North Carolina wilderness, far from their village. No women were allowed at these ceremonies. The rituals performed here were ancient and powerful, passed down through countless generations. The shamans said that the spirits of the forest would guide the hunters to their prey. but only if the ceremonies were performed correctly, with absolute precision and secrecy. A young woman named Running Deer watched from a distance as the men departed. Her husband was among them, and she was consumed with curiosity about what happened in those forbidden gatherings. What rituals did they perform? What magic did the shamans invoke? The women of the tribe spoke of these things only in whispers, and no one who knew the truth would speak of it. For days, Running Deer struggled with her desire to know. She was not a disobedient woman. She loved her husband and respected the traditions of her people, but the curiosity burned inside her like a fever. What harm could come from simply watching? She would be careful. No one would ever know. On the night of the next hunting ceremony, Running Deer enacted her plan. She had spent weeks preparing a cougar hide, treating it with special herbs and sewing it carefully so that it would fit over her body like a second skin. Cougars were sacred animals, spirits of the mountain. She believed that wearing the hide would protect her from detection, that the spirits would see only an animal, not a woman breaking the most sacred law of her people. As darkness fell, she donned the cougar skin and crept through the forest toward the ceremonial grounds. Her heart pounded with fear and excitement. She could hear the drums in the distance, rhythmic and hypnotic. The chanting of the shaman drifted through the trees, words in the old language that she did not fully understand. She found a large boulder near the clearing and crouched behind it, peering through a gap in the rocks. The men were arranged in a circle around a great fire. The shaman stood in the center, his body painted with sacred symbols that seemed to glow in the firelight. He held a staff topped with eagle feathers and chanted to the four directions. What Running Deer witnessed in that circle filled her with awe and terror. The shaman called upon the spirits of the forest, and they came. Ghostly forms materialized in the smoke from the fire, animal spirits and ancestors who had passed beyond the veil. The air hummed with power. The ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse with ancient energy. She was so entranced by the ceremony that she did not notice when her husband turned his head toward her hiding place. His eyes widened in horror. He opened his mouth to cry out a warning, but it was too late. The shaman's voice cut through the night like a blade. "There is a woman here. A woman has violated the sacred circle." The ceremony stopped instantly. All eyes turned toward Running Deer's hiding place. She tried to run, but her legs would not obey. The cougar hide suddenly felt impossibly heavy, as if it had become part of her own flesh. She clawed at it, trying to tear it off, but it would not come away. The shaman approached her, his face terrible in its fury. He raised his staff and spoke words that made the very air crackle with power. "You have broken the oldest law. You have defiled the sacred ceremony. For this crime you will be transformed. You desired to wear the skin of the cougar, to move unseen like the hunter. So shall you become the cougar, but cursed to walk on 6 legs instead of 4, a monster that belongs neither to the world of humans nor animals." Running Deer screamed as the transformation began. The cougar hide merged with her skin, fur sprouting across her body. Her spine stretched and twisted, and 2 additional legs burst from her sides. Her face elongated into a muzzle filled with razor teeth. Her eyes changed, becoming yellow and reflective like a cat's, but retaining a terrible human intelligence. The pain was beyond anything she had ever imagined, but worse than the physical agony was the mental torment. She could feel her humanity slipping away, replaced by savage animal instincts. When the transformation was complete, the thing that had been Running Deer let out a howl that echoed through the mountains. It was a sound of pure anguish, neither fully human nor fully animal. The hunters fled in terror, even her husband, unable to look at what his wife had become. The Wampus cat was born that night, and she has roamed the Appalachian wilderness ever since. Those who have seen the Wampus cat describe a creature of nightmares. She is the size of a mountain lion, but walking on 6 legs, giving her an unnatural spider-like gait that is deeply disturbing to witness. Her fur is matted and wild, and her eyes glow yellow in the darkness, filled with an intelligence and sorrow that makes the bravest hunters turn away. She moves with impossible speed through the forest, faster than any natural animal. Some say she can run up the sides of trees or leap across ravines that would be impossible for any creature to cross. She makes no sound when she walks, her padded feet falling silently on the forest floor. Often you do not know she is there until you see those glowing yellow eyes watching you from the darkness. The Wampus cat is driven by rage and sorrow. She attacks animals viciously, tearing them apart with her 6 sets of claws in frenzies of violence that seem to have no purpose beyond releasing her endless pain. Deer are found ripped to pieces, bears are slaughtered in their dens, even packs of wolves flee when they catch her scent. But what makes the Wampus cat truly terrifying is her unpredictable behavior toward humans. Sometimes she avoids them entirely, disappearing into the deep woods at the first sign of people. But other times, particularly when she encounters women alone in the forest, she follows them. She shadows them through the trees, always just out of sight, letting them hear her footfalls and her breathing. She wants them to know she is there, to feel the fear that she feels every moment of her cursed existence. In the 1960s, a series of strange sightings in North Carolina brought the Wampus cat legend back into public consciousness. People reported seeing an ape-like creature in the hills, something that walked upright but seemed part animal. The Goldsboro Argus newspaper covered the story extensively, using the term Wampus cat to describe the creature. Soon, hundreds of people descended on the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of the monster. Search parties combed the forests. Hunters sat in blinds all night, rifles ready, but the creature evaded them all. Occasionally, someone would find strange tracks, claw marks on trees, or areas where something large had bedded down in the underbrush. But the Wampus cat herself remained elusive. Then people started disappearing. First, it was a teenage girl who had gone hiking alone near the town of Linville. She never came home. Search parties found her backpack, shredded and covered in strange scratches. Her parents held out hope for weeks, but she was never found. Then a hunter vanished from his deer stand. His rifle was found on the ground below, and there were signs of a struggle, but no body. The sheriff eventually called off the searches and issued a statement calling the Wampus cat a hoax, likely just misidentified black bears. But the locals knew better. They had heard the stories passed down through generations. They knew that the Wampus cat was real and that she was hunting again. Even today, hikers in the deep Appalachian wilderness report encounters with something that does not quite fit any known animal. They describe the feeling of being watched by an intelligence that understands exactly what they are. They hear movements in the underbrush that circle around them, always staying just out of view, and sometimes when the moon is full and the mountains are silent, they catch a glimpse of something impossible, a large cat-like creature walking on 6 legs, its yellow eyes reflecting their flashlight beam before it vanishes into the darkness. The Cherokee elders still tell the story of running deer as a warning. Curiosity has its price. Sacred laws must be respected, but there is also sadness in their voices when they speak of her. She was not an evil woman, just a curious one, and her punishment was greater than her crime deserved. Some believe that on certain nights, if you listen carefully in the deepest parts of the forest, you can hear the Wampus cat crying. It is a sound that makes even hardened mountain men feel a chill run down their spines. A mournful, lonely wail that speaks of endless isolation and eternal regret. It is the sound of a woman who can never return home, never be human again, cursed to hunt and wander until the end of time. The Wampus cat is still out there, somewhere in the vast Appalachian wilderness. She is lonely and angry and filled with sorrow that has not diminished in the countless years since her transformation. She is waiting in the shadows between the ancient trees, watching with those terrible yellow eyes, remembering what it was like to be human, and hating every living thing that reminds her of what she has lost. If you ever find yourself alone in the Appalachian woods at night, and you feel the presence of something watching you, do not look directly into the shadows. Do not try to see what is there. Just move calmly and quickly back to safety. Because if you do look and you see 6 legs and yellow eyes staring back at you, it may already be too late. The Wampus cat has been waiting a very long time, and she is always hungry. Story 4. The Brown Mountain Lights. Daniel Morrison had been driving the mountain roads of North Carolina for 30 years, ever since he got his commercial driver's license at age 21. He knew every curve, every steep grade, every place where fog could roll in without warning. The route from Asheville to Morganton was one he had driven hundreds of times, hauling timber and supplies up and down Highway 181. He could make the drive in his sleep, and sometimes it felt like he did. But on this October night in 2023, something was different. It started just after sunset as Daniel's truck climbed toward Brown Mountain. The weather was clear, unusual for this time of year when fog and rain usually shrouded the peaks. The full moon hung low and bright, casting long shadows across the road. Daniel had his window down, enjoying the cool mountain air and the smell of pine trees. That was when he saw the first light. It appeared over the ridgeline ahead of him, a glowing orb about the size of a basketball. At first, Daniel thought it must be a plane, maybe a helicopter with a searchlight, but the light moved wrong. It hovered in place for several seconds, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Then it began to dance. The orb moved in impossible patterns, zigzagging across the sky with sudden changes of direction that no aircraft could achieve. It traced figure eights and spirals, moving with an intelligence and purpose that made the hair on Daniel's neck stand up. And as he watched, more lights appeared. Within minutes, the sky above Brown Mountain was filled with dozens of glowing orbs. They were different sizes and different colors, some white, some yellow, some with a reddish tinge. They moved independently but seemed to be communicating with each other, forming patterns and then breaking apart. Some would suddenly shoot up into the sky and disappear. Others would descend toward the mountain and vanish into the trees. Daniel pulled his truck over to the side of the road, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He had heard stories about the Brown Mountain lights his whole life. Every local kid grew up with the tales, but he had never seen them himself, and he had certainly never expected them to be this spectacular or this unnerving. He grabbed his phone and started recording, but the lights barely showed up on his screen. What appeared as brilliant orbs to his eyes looked like faint smudges on his phone's camera. Frustrated, he put the phone down and just watched. For 20 minutes, the lights performed their mysterious dance across the sky. Then gradually they began to dim. One by one, the orbs grew fainter and fainter until they simply vanished, winking out like candles being extinguished. Within minutes, the sky was empty again, just the moon and stars overhead. It was as if nothing had happened. Daniel sat in his truck for a long time, trying to process what he had just witnessed. He knew that no one would believe him. The video on his phone was useless, just shaky footage of darkness with a few vague spots of light. But he knew what he had seen was real. Finally, he put his truck in gear and continued down the mountain. But as he drove, he could not shake the feeling that the lights had been watching him, just as he had been watching them. The Brown Mountain lights have been observed for over 250 years. The first documented sighting was by a German engineer named Gerard de Bram in 1771. He wrote in his journal about strange lights dancing over the North Carolina mountains, lights that appeared and disappeared without explanation. But the lights were known long before Europeans arrived in Appalachia. The Cherokee people had stories about the lights that stretched back generations. They said that long ago there was a terrible battle on Brown Mountain between Cherokee and Catawba warriors. The fighting was brutal, with heavy casualties on both sides. When the battle finally ended, the Cherokee women went into the mountains carrying torches to search for their husbands, sons and fathers among the dead. According to the legend, the lights are the spirits of those women, still searching for their loved ones after all these centuries. On clear nights, they rise from the mountain and continue their eternal quest, moving through the darkness with their ghostly torches, hoping against hope to find what they have lost. In 1922, the United States Geological Survey decided to investigate the Brown Mountain lights scientifically. Their conclusion was dismissive. The lights were simply reflections from the headlights of cars on nearby highways or from trains running through the valley. It was a neat, rational explanation that satisfied skeptics and seemed to close the case. But then just a few years later, a massive flood swept through the region. Roads were washed out. Railroad tracks were destroyed. For weeks, there were no cars or trains anywhere near Brown Mountain. And yet on the first clear night after the flood, the lights appeared again, dancing over the ridgeline just as they always had. The scientific explanation had been debunked by nature itself. Over the decades, dozens of theories have been proposed. Some scientists think the lights are caused by piezoelectric effects, where pressure on quartz crystals in the mountain rock creates electrical discharges. Others suggest they might be ball lightning, a rare and poorly understood atmospheric phenomenon. Some believe the lights are swamp gas or phosphorescent organisms. Paranormal researchers claim they are spirits, UFOs, or portals to other dimensions. But despite all the theories and all the investigations, no one has ever been able to fully explain the Brown Mountain lights or predict when they will appear. What makes the lights truly mysterious is their behavior. They seem to possess some form of intelligence. Witnesses consistently report that the lights react to human presence. They move closer when people call out to them. They seem to play games, appearing and disappearing as if teasing observers. Some people claim the lights have followed their cars or even entered their vehicles. In 2019, a group of students from Appalachian State University set up sophisticated monitoring equipment on Brown Mountain. They used multiple cameras, radiation detectors, and electromagnetic field meters. For 3 weeks, they recorded the area continuously, hoping to capture definitive evidence of what the lights actually were. On the 14th night of their study, the lights appeared in force. The students watched in amazement as dozens of orbs filled the sky. But when they checked their equipment later, they found something disturbing. All of their cameras had malfunctioned at the exact moment the lights appeared. The electromagnetic field meters had gone haywire, recording impossible readings that made no scientific sense. And the radiation detectors showed brief spikes of energy that should not have been possible from any known natural source. Whatever the Brown Mountain lights are, they do not want to be studied. Park rangers and Forest Service workers who spend time in the area have their own stories. They talk about nights when the lights seem almost aggressive, diving at people or surrounding them in circles. They describe feeling watched when the lights are present, as if some intelligence is evaluating them. Some rangers refuse to patrol certain areas of Brown Mountain after dark, not because they are afraid of animals or getting lost, but because of the lights. One ranger, who asked not to be named, told a story about an encounter that happened to him in 2015. He was hiking alone at dusk, checking on a remote campsite when the lights appeared. At first he was fascinated and stopped to watch them. But then one of the orbs separated from the others and began moving directly toward him. As it got closer, he could see that it was not just a ball of light. There seemed to be some kind of structure inside it, like shadows or shapes moving within the glow. The light stopped about 20 feet away from him and hovered at eye level. He could feel heat radiating from it, and the air smelled like ozone after a lightning strike. The ranger stood frozen, unable to move or look away. He felt like the light was examining him, reading his thoughts somehow. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, the orb suddenly shot straight up into the sky and vanished. The ranger ran back to his truck and did not stop until he reached the ranger station. He never patrolled that area alone again. The Cherokee elders say that the lights are not meant to be understood by outsiders. They are part of the mountain, part of something ancient that was there long before humans and will be there long after we are gone. The women searching for their lost warriors is just one explanation, a story to help make sense of something that defies understanding. But there is another Cherokee legend, one that is told less often. It says that the lights are guardians of the mountain, spirits that protect sacred places from those who would disturb them. According to this version, the lights appear as a warning. They are telling people to stay away, that some places are not meant for the living to explore. The most disturbing aspect of the Brown Mountain lights is what happens to people who become obsessed with them. Over the years, Several individuals have become so fascinated by the lights that they dedicated their lives to understanding them. They spent months or years camping on the mountain, documenting every appearance, trying to find patterns. But something happens to these people. They become withdrawn and strange. They talk about the lights as if they are living things with personalities and intentions. Some claim they can communicate with the lights, that messages are being sent. Family and friends become concerned, but the obsessed individuals refuse to leave the mountain. A few have disappeared entirely. One researcher named Thomas Hawkins vanished in 1998 after spending 6 months camped on Brown Mountain. His tent was found intact, his belongings still inside, his journal lying open on his sleeping bag. The last entry in the journal was written in an increasingly frantic hand and read, "They are calling me. I finally understand. Tonight I will go to them. Tonight I will learn the truth." Thomas Hawkins was never seen again. Search parties found no trace of him beyond his campsite. It was as if he had simply walked off into the night and vanished into the mountain itself. The Brown Mountain lights continue to appear regularly, most often between September and November on clear nights. Tourists flock to viewing areas hoping to see them. Most are disappointed and go home with nothing but darkness and dim stars. But some are lucky or perhaps unlucky enough to witness the phenomenon. And sometimes, those who see the lights find that the lights have seen them too. Daniel Morrison continued driving his truck route for several months after his encounter with the lights. But he noticed changes in himself. He could not stop thinking about what he had seen. He began taking that route more often than necessary, even when it meant going out of his way. At night, he would dream about the lights, about floating above the mountain and seeing the world from their perspective. 6 months after his first sighting, Daniel saw the lights again. This time, he did not just watch them from his truck. He felt compelled to get closer. He parked and hiked up the mountain in the darkness, following the lights as they danced ahead of him through the trees. He climbed for hours, never getting tired, never afraid, just drawn forward by an irresistible pull. Just before dawn, he found himself standing on the peak of Brown Mountain, surrounded by the glowing orbs. They circled around him slowly, and he felt a sense of peace he had never experienced before. In that moment, he understood something fundamental about the lights, about the mountain, about the ancient forces that dwelled in these hills. But when the sun rose and the lights faded, that understanding faded with them. He could remember the feeling, but not the knowledge itself. It was like waking from a profound dream and being unable to recall the details, left only with a sense of loss. Daniel does not talk about his experiences anymore. His family noticed he has become quieter, more distant. He still drives his truck through the mountains, but now he always stops at certain places, even when he is running late. He stops and looks out at Brown Mountain, watching and waiting, because now he knows something that he cannot put into words. The lights are not just lights. They are not merely natural phenomena or spirits or UFOs. They are something older and stranger than any of those explanations. They are part of the mountain itself, part of the ancient bedrock that formed over 1 billion years ago when the world was young. And sometimes, if you are lucky or cursed enough to truly see them, they become part of you too. The Brown Mountain lights will continue to appear long after we are all gone. They were there before humans walked these mountains, and they will be there when the last human has turned to dust. They dance and play and watch, eternal and mysterious, guardians of secrets that we are not meant to know. If you ever visit Brown Mountain on a clear autumn night and you see strange lights dancing over the ridgeline, watch if you must. Marvel at their beauty, but do not try to follow them. Do not try to understand them. And whatever you do not let them know that you have seen them, because once the lights have noticed you, you will never be free of them again. 35. The Flatwoods Monster. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set over the small town of Flatwoods, West Virginia on September 12, 1952. It was a Friday, and the children at Flatwoods Elementary School were taking advantage of the last few minutes of daylight to play on the school field. Four boys: Edward May, his younger brother Freddie Neil Nunley, and Tommy Heyer were tossing a football around, laughing and shouting as boys do. That is when they saw it. A bright light streaked across the evening sky, moving fast and low. At first they thought it might be a meteor, but it was moving too slowly and too deliberately. As they watched, the object seemed to change direction slightly, arcing toward a nearby hillside on the Fisher farm. Whatever it was left a glowing red trail behind it as it disappeared over the ridge. The boys looked at each other with wide eyes. Had they just witnessed a plane crash? Or something else? Without discussing it, all four boys started running toward the crash site. Their hearts pounded with excitement and fear. As they ran through the darkening woods, they recruited Kathleen May, the boys' mother, who was working in her garden. She tried to convince them it was probably nothing, but their insistence and genuine alarm convinced her to investigate. They also grabbed Eugene Lemon, a 17-year-old National Guardsman who happened to be visiting the May home. The group of six made their way up the hill as darkness fell over the mountain. Eugene Lemon led the way with his flashlight, with Kathleen May close behind and the four boys following. They could see a strange red glow through the trees ahead, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air grew warmer as they climbed, and a thick mist began to form around them. That mist was unlike any fog they had ever encountered. It was thick and oily, and it had a terrible smell, sharp and metallic like burning electronics mixed with rotting meat. Kathleen May felt her eyes begin to water and her throat start to burn. The boys were coughing, but their curiosity drove them forward. As they reached the top of the hill, Eugene Lemon's dog, which had been running ahead, suddenly stopped. The dog's hackles rose and it let out a low, terrified whine before turning and running back down the hill. Dogs do not scare easily, and seeing their brave guardian flee should have been warning enough. But the group pressed on. They emerged into a small clearing and saw the source of the red glow. Sitting among the trees was a large spherical object, roughly 15 feet across, pulsing with a deep red light that seemed to come from within. The surface of the sphere was metallic but seemed to ripple like liquid. The air around it shimmered with heat. Eugene swept his flashlight across the clearing to get a better look at the object. The beam caught something else, something that made his blood turn to ice. Standing near a large oak tree, barely 20 feet away, was a creature that could not possibly exist. It was enormous, at least 10 feet tall. Its body was vaguely humanoid but covered in what looked like a dark metallic dress or robe that reflected the red light in strange ways. But it was the creature's head that would haunt the witnesses for the rest of their lives. The head was shaped like a spade, or an ace of spades from a playing card, pointed at the top and wider at the bottom. Where a face should have been, there were two massive eyes that glowed a brilliant orange red, like molten metal. The eyes did not blink. They stared with an intelligence that was utterly alien, completely inhuman. The creature had no visible legs. It hovered several inches above the ground, floating motionless in the mist. Its arms, if they could be called that, ended in gnarled, claw-like appendages that looked both mechanical and organic at the same time. For a moment, that felt like an eternity. The group and the creature simply stared at each other. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the pulsing hum coming from the sphere in the clearing. Then the creature moved. It did not walk or fly. It glided forward, moving with a fluid motion that was deeply wrong to witness. As it approached, it released a hissing sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. The mist around it grew thicker and more toxic. Kathleen May felt her lungs burning, and her vision began to blur. That was when Eugene Lemon screamed. His flashlight fell from his hands and he turned and ran. The spell was broken. Kathleen grabbed the nearest boys and followed, crashing through the underbrush in complete panic. They ran down the hill blindly in the darkness, falling over roots and rocks, branches tearing at their clothes and skin. Behind them, they could hear that terrible hissing sound following through the trees. They did not stop running until they reached the May house. Kathleen immediately tried to call the sheriff's office, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial the phone. When she finally got through, the deputy who answered initially thought it was a prank, but the terror in her voice was real, and within 20 minutes Sheriff Robert Carr and his deputies arrived at the May home. By then, the entire group was showing physical symptoms. Kathleen May was vomiting uncontrollably. The boys' throats were raw and burning. Eugene Lemon's eyes were red and swollen. They all complained of intense nausea and difficulty breathing. Whatever they had encountered on that hill had poisoned them. Sheriff Carr organized a search party and headed up to the Fisher farm. When they reached the clearing, they found evidence that something had been there. The grass was flattened in a circular pattern. There were strange marks in the dirt. The area still had an odd smell, though not as intense as the witnesses described. But there was no crashed object, no creature, no sphere of pulsing red light. Whatever had been there was gone. The story made the newspapers the next morning. Local journalist A. Lee Stewart interviewed the witnesses and was struck by how consistent their accounts were. They all described the same creature with the same details. None of them changed their story under questioning. The genuine terror in their voices and their physical symptoms convinced Stewart that something real had happened on that hill. The story quickly spread beyond West Virginia. Newspapers across the country picked it up. Some reporters mocked the witnesses, calling it mass hysteria or a hoax, but others were more thoughtful. The symptoms the witnesses experienced were real and documented by doctors. Those symptoms were remarkably similar to exposure to mustard gas or other chemical agents. Burning eyes and throat, nausea, vomiting, and difficulty breathing. What kind of hoax could produce genuine chemical burns? In the days following the incident, other witnesses came forward with their own sightings. A local woman reported seeing a similar creature near her home several days before the Flatwoods incident. Others described strange lights in the sky over Brown Mountain and the surrounding areas in the weeks leading up to September 12th. The United States Air Force took an interest in the case. Officers arrived in Flatwoods to interview witnesses and investigate the site. Their official conclusion was that the witnesses had seen a meteor and a barn owl, and in their excitement had misinterpreted what they saw. The chemical symptoms were attributed to wildflower exposure and hysteria. But the people of Flatwoods knew that explanation was nonsense. Barn owls do not float above the ground. Meteors do not leave behind circles of flattened grass and strange marks in the soil. And wildflowers do not cause chemical burns. The creature became known as the Flatwoods Monster, and it joined the ranks of Appalachian legends alongside Mothman and the Wampus Cat. But unlike those other legends which stretch back centuries, the Flatwoods Monster was a modern mystery, witnessed in an age of science and reason by multiple credible witnesses. In the years since 1952, there have been other sightings of similar creatures in Appalachia and beyond. In 1955, the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter in Kentucky involved creatures with glowing eyes and metallic skin. In the 1960s and 70s, numerous reports came in of UFOs and strange beings throughout West Virginia and the surrounding states. Some researchers believe these sightings are all connected, that there is something about the ancient Appalachian Mountains that attracts non-human intelligence. The mountains are old beyond measure, formed over 1 billion years ago. The rocks contain quartz and other crystals that could theoretically generate unusual electromagnetic fields. The dense forests and remote areas provide perfect cover for things that want to remain hidden. Kathleen May never changed her story. Until her death in 2015, she maintained that what she saw on that hillside was real. She described it in interviews, always with the same details, always with the same conviction. The physical symptoms she experienced that night caused health problems for the rest of her life. Eugene Lemon refused to talk about the incident for decades. The experience traumatized him so deeply that he would become physically ill if anyone brought it up. Only near the end of his life did he finally discuss what happened, and even then, he could barely get through the story without breaking down. The May brothers and the other boys carried the memory of that night throughout their lives. They became men, had families, built careers, but they never forgot the creature with the glowing orange eyes that floated above the ground and filled the air with poison. The town of Flatwoods eventually embraced its strange history. A museum dedicated to the Flatwoods monster opened, displaying witness testimony, newspaper clippings, and artistic renderings of the creature. Every year, fans of the unexplained visit the town, hoping to learn more about what happened on that September night. But the people who were actually there do not need a museum to remember. The image of that creature is burned into their memories forever. The spade-shaped head, the glowing eyes, the dark metallic body, the way it hovered and hissed and filled the air with toxic mist. In recent years, there have been new sightings. Hikers in the mountains around Flatwoods occasionally report seeing strange lights or encountering unusual mist that burns their eyes and lungs. Some describe glimpses of something large moving through the trees at dusk, something that does not move like any natural animal. The official explanation remains that the witnesses saw a barn owl, but ask anyone who has spent time in the deep Appalachian wilderness and they will tell you a different story. They will tell you that these mountains hold secrets, that things dwell in the dark hollows and misty valleys that science cannot explain. The Flatwoods monster, whatever it was, remains one of the most credible and disturbing encounters with the unknown in American history. Multiple witnesses with consistent stories, physical evidence of something unusual, documented medical symptoms that could not be faked. Something was on that hillside on September 12, 1952. Something that could float above the ground, emit toxic fumes, and stare with eyes that glowed like hot coals. Something that did not belong to this world, or at least not to the world that we know. And if it was there once, who is to say it did not come back? The sphere of pulsing red light was never found. The creature was never caught or identified. Whatever visited Flatwoods that night simply vanished back into the darkness, leaving only terrified witnesses and unanswered questions. Late at night, when the mist rolls through the valleys and the forests grow dark and silent, some people still report seeing strange red lights moving through the trees near the Fisher farm. They see shapes that do not quite make sense, shadows that are too tall and move wrong. And sometimes, if the wind is right, they smell that distinctive odor, metallic and rotten, like burning circuits and decaying flesh. The Flatwoods monster may be long gone, or it may still be out there, hiding in the ancient hills, watching and waiting. The Appalachian Mountains have witnessed the birth and death of countless species over their billion-year existence. Who are we to say what else they might conceal in their dark hollows and mist-shrouded valleys? If you ever find yourself hiking in the mountains of West Virginia on a September evening, and you see a strange red glow through the trees, and you smell something sharp and metallic on the wind, perhaps it would be wise to turn around. Walk away, do not investigate. Do not let your curiosity draw you toward that light, because some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. And some things, once seen, can never be unseen. The witnesses from 1952 would tell you that much is true. They would tell you to stay away from strange lights in the mountains. They would tell you that there are worse things than barn owls in the woods of Appalachia. And on quiet nights when the memories come flooding back, they would tell you that those glowing orange eyes still haunt their dreams, watching them from the darkness, waiting patiently for another opportunity to reveal themselves to the unsuspecting and the curious. The Flatwoods monster is patient. The mountains are ancient, and some doors once opened can never truly be closed again.